Hello, everybody, and welcome to 11 Questions Special Edition. Tonight, I have a very special interview. I get to talk to, I call my creative brother, a man who I've been working with for almost as long as I've been publishing. We've come up with some great ideas and done some great projects together. I'd like to introduce to everyone, Balogun Ojetade.
Hey, and you got it right.
I told you I've been practicing, man.
Hey, cool.
So Balogun,
hey,
welcome. I'm glad you're here tonight. Glad to have a chance to talk to you. I'm
glad to be here.
Balogun is a Renaissance man. He is good at so many different things. Tonight we're going to focus on his creative side, his prose and stories and game creation. But I like to start off by reading his bio, and so sit back and relax because it's a long one. As a former combat veteran, master and technical director of the African Martial Arts Institute and co-chair of the Urban Survival and Preparedness Institute, Balogun Ojetade is the author of the best-selling nonfiction book, African Martial Arts, Discovering the Warrior Within, The African Warrior's Bible, Surviving the Urban Apocalypse, The Urban Self-Defense Manual, The Young African Warrior's Guide to Defeating Bullies and Trolls, Never Unarmed, The African Warrior's Guide to Improvised Weapons, Ofo Ase, 365 daily affirmations to awaken the African warrior within, Ori, The African Warrior's Mindset, Ogunye, Protecting the African Family and Community, Kori O, Protecting African Children from Violence and Sexual Abuse, and SKG, The Black Man and Woman's Guide to Sticks, Knives, and Guns. He is one of the leading authorities on Afrofuturism and Afro-retroism, film, fashion, or fiction that combines African and or African-American culture with a blend of retro styles and futuristic technology in order to explore the themes of tension between the past and future and between the alienating and empowering effects of technology and on creative resistance. He writes about Afrofuturism, Afro-retroism, Sword and Soul, Rococo, Steamfunk, and Dieselfunk at chroniclesofharriet.com. He is author of 25 novels and game books: Moses, The Chronicle of Harriet Tubman, Book 1 and 2, The Chronicles of Harriet Tubman, Fredonia, Redeemer, Once Upon a Time in Africa, Fist of Africa, A Single Link, Wrath of the Saifu, The Scythe, The Keys, Redeemer, The Cross Chronicles, Beneath the Shining Jewel, Cutie Pies, The Savannah Swan Files, Book O, and A Haunting in the Swats, The Savannah Swan Files, Book 2, Siafu Saves the World, Siafu versus the Horde, Dimbo's Ditty, The Beatdown, Initiate 16, Gunsmoke Blues, Malik, Confessions of a Black Identity Extremist, Malik, Confessions of a Black Identity Extremist 2, Enemy of the State, Grandma's Hand, Kill City, Steamfunketeers, the Steamfunk role-playing game, and the Steamfunketeers Adventure, The Haunting of House Crumb, contributing co-editor of 3 anthologies, Kikanga the Anthology, Steamfunk, and Dieselfunk, and contributing editor of the Rococo Anthology and Black Power, the Superhero Anthology. He is also the creator and author of the Afrofuturistic manga series, Jagun Jagun, Lewa, Pretty Warrior, author and co-creator of Ice Cold Carter photographic novel series and co-author of the Ngolo comic book series. Finally, he is co-author of the award-winning screenplay Ngolo, Diaspora, and co-creator of Kikanga, the Sword and Soul playing game, with both with author Milton Davis. Okay. You can see Balogun is a very talented person, a very knowledgeable individual. I had the opportunity to meet him when I was actually looking for a source for African martial arts to include in my Sword and Soul novels. And when I met him, I was meeting him in that capacity. But as we began to talk and get to know each other, I found out that he had talents in so many different things. I didn't mention that he's also a fight choreographer, that he's an actor, that he's a director. I mean, he's just so many things. So in order to keep this thing at 30 minutes, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on his creative talents, and when it comes to writing and creating games. But I like to start this off by asking one question that I think would be interesting, is that knowing your spiritual background, that you are a Babalawo and you are a practitioner of Ifa, how does that influence your fiction writing and your prose?
Greatly. So, like if you said the book Initiate 16. 16 is the number that is very, very sacred, if you will, to Ifa. Orumila, who is our, I guess, depository of knowledge, he's really not an Orisha, because Orisha are forces of nature. And Orumila, and everybody got the force of nature. Orumila is knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. Everybody don't have that. So, and the way our folklore goes, he left the earth. So he's not really Orisha. He's the mouthpiece of the Orisha. So his number is 16, because our body of knowledge, the Odu, is based off 16. There are 16 major Odu, then 240 minor Odu based on those 16. It's a binary system. So it's 256 total. And so I wrote Initiate 16. This person has on their bones the Odu inscripted, well, on their spine, and it gives them powers that they can access. So stuff like that. And then when you come like to Once Upon a Time in Africa, when we talk about the Balogun in that story, if you want to call him a villain, he's really not, but he's so into the law that it's almost oppressive, right? And there's an Odu that warns the Balogun not to be oppressive like that, based on being too much of a stickler for the law. So that's how it affects me. You know, I always throw something in there of African martial arts and of Ifa, little bits in everything I write.
So let's talk, since you brought it up, let's talk a little bit about Once Upon a Time in Africa. I believe that was the first book that I published by you. And it was basically a sword and soul book. And give us a little synopsis of that book, what it's about, and again, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, what was the I guess the creative process behind that story. What were you trying to convey in that story?
Okay, so Once Upon a Time in Africa is about Eshu Sheke, who's a princess, and she wears shokoto, where most Yoruba women wear dresses or skirts. She wears shokoto, which are the warrior's pants, right? She's into martial arts. Her teacher, well, first of all, her parents get divination. It says she has to marry the greatest warrior in all of Africa. And she says, well, how am I going to do that? Because the greatest warrior in all of Africa is my teacher, who's a woman. So she says, so, you know, that's not going to happen. And they say, well, we got to throw a tournament to find out who is. So they do this tournament with all the greatest fighters throughout Africa, right? They the Temileke, who is the Basho Rune, he's the senator of Oyo. He travels with this thing called Imperio Rune. It's a device that he uses to travel to these different places, you know, basically teleport to these different countries, and he's enlisting all these different warriors from Africa. And this one brother, Akimbe, he's a young man who wants to fight. His father, no, you're not fighting. His father teaches the warriors. He's like, you're not fighting, right? It ain't happening because the Balogun is too hard, you know, so you're not going to be under him. So he cleans up the Balogun, Kimbe cleans up the Balogun's place when he's gone, when he's off to war. Being mischievous, he puts on the Balogun's crown. And it has these beads you can't see. He'll get, he'll be in prison or killed for doing that if he's caught. Divination is when it's done for Eshusheke, she doesn't like being forced to marry anybody. So she says, let me see this, because of course they're gonna try to push it so she marries Balogun. She hears her parents talking, they're gonna pull some moves. And she's like, I'm gonna see if this Balogun, can really fight. So she goes to challenge him. And it's really a Kimbe she's challenging. He can't say, hey, I'm not the Balogun, because he's scared if he does that, he's gonna get killed. So they fight, and she's like, damn, he's skilled, So she likes him because of his fighting and because of his energy. He's not trying to be with her either, right? So she likes that, but they end up falling for each other, and they are falling for each other. He gets in the tournament. His mother figures it out, so she gets in the tournament. She disguises herself because it's supposed to be all men in the tournament fighting for the hand of Eshusheke. So she's like, I'm gonna beat him if he gets close. So she's just beating everybody. And the idea is to let him win as the Balogun. So then she ends up marrying the Balogun. So she's whooping everybody. So that's going on. At the meanwhile, there's an invading force coming to try to take Africa, and so the warriors have to decide if they're going to continue to fight for Eshushike's hand, or if they're going to fight this opposing force. And Eshushike has to decide, is she going to fight that force with them, right? And so everything comes to a head, and fun ensues.
Yeah, well, what I like the most about this book was the fact that you had this tournament, this African martial arts tournament, because again, when we think of martial arts contemporarily, we're usually thinking about Asian martial arts, and it's because they've done a good marketing job, of putting their martial arts out front and center, and so people normally think of it. And the fact that you use the African martial arts for this tournament, and what you did as far as including the spirituality and the I guess you could say the traditions into your story, and that's what Sword and Soul is all about. That's something that I feel like you do very well, and it reflects in that, and also reflects in the world building and the gameplay for Kakanga, which we'll talk about later. Because before I talk about that, I want to talk about the Chronicles of Harriet Tubman. A lot of people don't know this, but Balogun was the first person to write a steampunk novel. And it was the Chronicles of Harriet Tubman. And I had never seen someone take a Black or African historical figure and write a story about them in that way. It was a brand new approach to working with historical fiction that way with Black people. And so, I mean, why Harriet Tubman? Why tell the story this way? Because she's not the only character that you put a spin on in this book. There's some other characters that you put a spin on as well. So tell us a little bit about that and what brought that about.
Well, I've always been a fan of Harriet Tubman. I would say she is, to me, the greatest freedom fighter that's ever lived, right? And one of the things that I study deeply is freedom fighters, and to me, she's the greatest. So I've always admired her. Growing up, my mother was a fan of the Wild Wild West television show, and she would have me sit and watch that with her. And we're not seeing any of us in there though. And I was like, damn, well, not damn as a little boy, but I was like, man, Ma, where we at in there? She said, we just have to enjoy what we can get, because they're not making us heroes and nothing. And that they aren't making us heroes is what hit me. They aren't doing it, but I'm going to do it one day, right? And so I was probably about 4 or 5 years old when I decided, man, one day I'm gonna write something like Wild Wild West, because that's unique, and it was steampunk before there was steampunk, right? and I'm going to have Harriet Tubman like Jim West, but even better. And then as I got older, I started reading on Harriet Tubman, because as a little boy, you just admire because you've heard little stories that my parents would tell me about her, but you start reading and how she was on a train and she's in the front and they're telling her, you got to go to the back. She was a former soldier. So she's like, no, I deserve to sit in the front. Well, you're getting off the train. She's like, no, I'm not getting off the train. And they break her arm while she's fighting them. And it took 5 people after her arm was broken to push her off the train. When they started looking for her, before she became a soldier, when they were looking for her for helping enslaved Africans to freedom, they described her as a 6 foot tall man, 4'11" woman, which is what she was. So somebody was accurate. All kinds of stuff, So I said, okay, if she got super healing abilities because she could fight like that. She got super strength. It took 5 people to get her off. She got the ability to disguise herself, right? So I'm looking at if this was told like Paul Bunyan or somebody, they would take whatever their attributes really are and just exaggerate them. So that's what I decided to do with Harriet. And then doing it with Harriet, I started thinking, well, she needs a villain that is equally like that. So I said, I'm gonna take somebody else from history. I said, well, in her story, she was supposed to go and help John Brown fight, but she didn't show up, right? Because Frederick Douglass, you shouldn't go to that, right? Go help him. So she didn't go. And I figured, how would John Brown feel about that, right? So I said, well, there's my antagonist. That's John Brown. He's pissed that she didn't show up. So he's going to cause a problem. So I said, okay, what could John Brown do? So I took what he is and just exaggerated and, made the villain. And then I had to just fill it in. And then I had to have the central character that kind of is the handler for Harriet. And that's Boss Bello. And so Boss Bello is, and I say they the brush. Those people are the brush that, really like superheroes. They're brushed. They got powers. And Boss Bello is the elder. He's the oldest that people can find of all the brush. And then we find out in the book that happens in your world, Harriet Tubman, Fredonia, that Boss Bello is actually a famous character in Black history all across. His name ain't Boss Bello, but it is Boss Bello, but he's hidden himself with somebody else across all these different realities. And each one of them is aware of each Boss Bello, right? So he's really the most powerful of the brush in existence. And he's figured out how to travel to different realities. So he travels to Fredonia for a specific reason. So, with Harriet and with Stagecoach Mary, who is my anti-hero,
Yeah. See, and that's what I like about your sister. When I was reading the book and I'm coming across these historical figures that you're using, normally when you read historical fiction, people will basically present that character maybe embellished and like something like that, but they'll still be the basic characteristics. But you were using people, and I would be expecting this person to be a good guy, but then the person would be a bad person. I'm like, wait a minute, somebody's gonna be pissed off when they read this book. Because this person, in history, you don't see them that way, and I think that's one of the things I like the most about your writing is that it's very unexpected. It never goes in the direction that you think it's going to go into. And the other thing that before we talk about some of the other books is that that I found out that you have a leaning toward horror, and there's usually a element of horror in all of the books that you write. And I know I have a lot of other author friends who write horror, and so what I wanted to ask you, because this might be something that'd be interesting to them and everyone as well, is why horror and where does it come from? I mean, what is it about horror that that interests you and that sparks your imagination?
Well, I would watch, it really started with my sisters reading The Exorcist, right? And they were talking about how frightening it was and everything. And they didn't want to let me read the book because it was too frightening. And I was a little boy. I snuck and read the book. Felt no fear, wasn't frightened at all. So I said, what's going on? So I would convince my sisters to take me to see R-rated horror movies, right? And we would go to a place called the McVickers, which would allow children, they didn't care. You paid $1.75, you get to sit in there and watch 3 movies, right? And so it was usually 2 kung fu movies and a horror flick, or 3 kung fu movies or whatever, right? And I didn't really like kung fu movies. That's a whole nother, even though I'm a martial artist. But probably because I'm a martial artist. But the horror films, and then there's another theater called Chicago Theater. It always a horror film and an action movie. And they would let me in there too sometimes, and depending on who was working there. Some dudes working there, you can't come in our thing. I mean, I was 10, 11 years old. But I was watching all the horror films and wasn't experiencing any fear. So I got this thing where I'm going to watch every horror. Something got to scare me, something. And I'll watch all these movies and not experience fear. And so it became an obsession. And I said, well, I'm going to try to write things that scare people, but that go a little in the horror direction, or scare people or terrorize. You know, you can horror or terror, but without going full out horror until I got something that I think that would scare me, and then I'll put it in there. And so I didn't write horror elements until I finally wrote Beneath the Shining Jewel, which was absolute horror because I found what would scare me. Funnily, in a horror, in zombie stuff is so not scary. But what if the zombie's not dead? That's the scary part. And I got that from watching that there's a fungus and then there's a worm also that basically takes over the body of creatures. It infects them and then corrupts their brain. Basically, they're dead. They're just a meat suit controlled by the fungus or by that worm, and they're controlled to go either to higher ground to spread more of itself, or to go to water in the case of the worm, which is to get it to the worm, and then it fulfills its life cycle. Okay, so I said, damn, that's scary as hell. That was scary in itself. And so I said, what if people were like that, right? And so that's when we have the narmals, or Guguna Kiniwa, which is, in Kikanga. So that's the narmals. That's when I finally wrote a full-out horror book.
Yeah, and that was like, and I said the same thing when I finally read that book. I said, this is it. Balogun is finally letting his horror flag fly on this one. You're not getting bits and pieces anymore. You're getting the whole full in your face. This is me writing horror, and for other people who have read the Gakanga books, they talk about that one. Matter of fact, there was a particular fan that was asking, when are we getting Beneath the Shining Jewel 2?
Right, so I've written 2, but I think it was too horrific, so I stopped. I don't want to just go too far and give myself another stroke or something. So I got to bring it down a little bit.
So we're gonna backpedal a little bit, because this is probably a question I should have asked earlier. But I guess because we know each other we've known each other for so long, I kind of take certain things for granted. But like myself, you write African-based science fiction and fantasy and horror. And what brought you to this? What was your reason to write this and to express yourself that way?
Because I just didn't see it growing up and wanted to see it. And I remember just the sorrow of any bronze colored character, say, oh, he's probably black. I remember that, me and my friends saying that, oh, that one's probably black. We're just searching for somebody black in the fiction that we love, science fiction, fantasy, action adventure. I used to always get Doc Samson books and just, imagine that he was black instead of just the man of bronze. They called him that because he was black. That was my imagination,
Yeah.
It was sad. And then when I started playing Dungeons and Dragons, same thing. We just weren't in there. And then the white dude who taught us how to play, taught 4 other black people how to play. He kept calling me an orc. And I just didn't like that. Orc. And he kept on. And I said, man, look, you call me an orc one more time, I'm gonna beat your ass. I didn't quite know what an orc was, but I know it didn't sound right. And then as I began to study the orc, the way they wrote the orc, they were talking about us.
Yeah.
And so then I knew it definitely was an insult that this dude, Cody, I'll say his name, was using. I won't say his last name, but that he was using. And so I began to write Dungeons and Dragons adventures set in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Then we had the paladins and all that in Africa. I said, nah, I got to find the African analog for a paladin and, for a cleric and those things. So we started using things we didn't know nothing about. We started talking, my character's a Babalao, that was the cleric. We had no idea, I knew more than most because I do a traditional African martial art, right? Martial art systems that's made of 3 arts, really. So I knew a little bit more than them, but not much, as far as warriors and spiritual characters and stuff. We were just doing the best we could. And I always was like, well, as I know more, I'm going to write more. And that's just what I did. So when the opportunity came for me to be able to write books, and you can put them out, it don't cost you $1 million, or you don't have to go through the big 5 to do it, I jumped on it. I already had Once Upon a Time in Africa as a screenplay. And so I just converted that into a book. And I've been shopping that as a screenplay around just to my friends to see if it was something that was even interesting. And they all liked it. So I said, okay. And then, Redeemer was actually the first book that I sold. Well, no, actually, Chronicles of Harriet was the first book that I sold. And then Redeemer, and I was like, okay, Black characters. But then that wasn't enough. They got to be on the covers too.
Yeah.
Because people have to see those images. So, that was just always stuff that I just yearned for. And that's why I did it, man. I think that's probably why most authors start off, because they're just looking for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why there's a big push with us kind of fighting back, if you will, against the lack of us, the erasure of us in fiction historically, even though we've been writing science fiction and fantasy since the 1800s.
Yeah.
But we didn't, thank goodness, that's the one good thing about social media. We were able to find that out.
Yeah.
Because we didn't, because those brothers and sisters writing it, there weren't no Black people on their covers either. Of course not, So we didn't know. I didn't know Charles Saunders was Black back when I first encountered Charles's writing in Dragon Magazine number 22.
Yeah.
I said, man, he wrote about, it's called Out of Africa. My first article that I wrote for Black Belt Magazine is called Out of Africa in honor of that, but it's dealing with martial arts, right? Mm-hmm. And it's dealing with the creatures of Africa and how you could use them in Dungeons and Dragons. I said, man, this white man got it right. Because I just knew it wasn't no Black man, thinking like me, another Black man wanting to see this kind of stuff. Yeah, many Black men, Black and women, who, we just didn't know each other existed.
Yeah, I think that's the power of social media. It allowed us, and I think that's one reason why you start to see this groundswell like in early 2000s, because you started this, it allowed us to connect on social media and form these groups and find each other. And I knew I heard so many times people saying, I thought I was the only one, or I didn't realize there was so many Black people out there, because a lot of us were isolated in different groups, maybe physically. I think my upbringing was probably a little unique, because everybody I knew read comic books. I mean, it didn't matter if you were like the bookworm or the quote unquote bully. Everybody read comic books. So it wasn't a big thing. Nobody made fun of you for doing that, because it was just something that all of us did. And you may have read different kinds, but everybody read them. Everybody was into it, and stuff like that. So it wasn't you were never in a situation where you felt like you were an outsider or something like that because you did that. But being on social media allowed people to form these groups and get together and share these ideals. Speaking of ideals, I mean, you were the person that introduced me to steampunk. When I was first looking at writing stuff like From Here to Timbuktu, I was thinking alternate history. I wasn't even considering steampunk. I didn't know much about it. And as after you introduced me to it and I looked into it, I was like, hey, this would kind of give me a wider range, more to work in, imagination wise, to be able to work and incorporate it. And then, of course, we had the conversation, and we online, and that's how we came up with the Steamfunk anthology. And I just recently talked about it. I did a little thing online, and when we were at Anachrocon, and when we introduced the Steamfunk anthology, and you did presentation, and everybody came out of that room just saying, hey, I want Steamfunk. I was not in that room. So it's been years since that happened. And you may not remember exactly, but what the hell did you say in that room?
I've been thinking about that. I've been thinking about what did I say since you made that post on Facebook. I don't remember myself. All I remember is telling them that been looking for this, been writing this for years, been wanting to write it all my life. And when I finally heard the word steampunk, and I want this to go on record, from Nicole Gibbons Kurtz, that was her name at the time. Okay, Nicole Kurtz, another great author, or a great author. I ain't saying I'm a great author, I'm saying she is. When I wrote, I just did like really half of the Chronicles of Harriet, book 1, and sold it to her. Her publishing company brought it out, right? She said, yeah, we love this story. This is a great steampunk story, not steamfunk, right? We know where steamfunk comes from. You talked about that, and I have many times. But I had never heard of steampunk. And when she said, this is a great steampunk story, I looked at my wife and said, I found the name for the thing I've been doing all my life. So at that point, and I know I told them that, and then I told them how we got from steampunk to steamfunk and what steampunk means. And it don't mean walking around in the 1970s with a top hat on. It's not that, it's much more meaningful than that. So when I began to talk about that, and I do remember saying, but I write this stuff, my partner Milton writes this stuff, but we ain't sitting around wearing a tuxedo and top hat in the morning drinking amethyst, whatever you call that job. We ain't sitting around, sipping tea at noon in a smoking jacket. That would be so pretentious. And I got a monocle in my eye. We're not doing that. We're writing meaningful works, but we don't have to play in your sandbox. You want to do that, you do that, but that's not us. So I know that part was there. I think I may have even been a little insulting. I don't know. But whatever, it worked. And, we went from Black folk looking the other way at us to everybody at our table. So
yeah, that was it. that was and because Steamfunk was like, I think it was the first anthology that took a different look at the steampunk genre.
Yeah.
And after it came out, there were a number of anthologies that came out after that. And it's almost like, I tell people, it's almost like people were waiting for permission to do something different.
And even those people who were bringing out from different cultures, a lot of them start calling their stuff steampunk, which is funny, you know. So
yeah, we did deal with that. So
yes.
I only got a few more minutes, but I want to, and we're going for so much, and I want to drop one more thing that I wanted to talk about. A couple of things I want to talk about. I want to give you some time to talk about your game and your game development, because that seems to be where your creativity is right now, and that's what's really pushing you. But before we get to that, we talked about Steamfunk, and we talked about Diesel. I mentioned Dieselfunk a little bit because we did the Dieselfunk anthology together, right. And particularly your story, the Scythe or the Sith, whatever people want to pronounce it.
Scythe, yeah.
Yeah, the reason that that story was significant to me, and in hindsight became even more significant, because recently we've heard a lot about the Red Summer, and particularly about Tulsa and what happened there. And right. Scythe was the first book that I read that actually incorporated that into a fictional setting. It was the premise and the background of your character, basically. So, I mean, what led you to that particular part of history and to write a book that used or incorporated that history in it?
Nobody had ever talked about that part of history, and I was surprised because you're talking about Harlem during the Roaring '20s, and so I was just shocked. And I said, well, I want to do something. And of course, Dieselfunk goes from the '20s through the '40s, right? I looked at the aesthetics, and man, the '20s, I love the aesthetics. And then I started looking at the greatness. Can you imagine? You had people like, during those times, Black people, as oppressed as we were, you had Black people like Noble Drew Ali, Elijah Muhammad, Marcus Garvey, teaching millions of people, standing up. Well, not Elijah Muhammad came after in the '30s, but in the '20s, Noble Drew Ali and Marcus Garvey in the '20s, teaching the way they taught.
Yeah.
Millions of Black people.
Yeah.
That's really bold. It's easy to do that today and talk blackity black and throw up your black fist. That's easy today. In the 1920s. So I said, so, okay, talking blackity black is one thing, that's powerful, but doing business, making money, that's considered warfare to white folks that ain't making no money. So that's why Tulsa was attacked, right? Greenwood, actually. So I said, I want to write about this, and let me, study the culture. And there's a doctor who actually was killed during that time, and that's the doctor who ends up the protagonist. Mm-hmm. So in that story, he's killed, but he's given a deal, he thinks it's a deal, to come back and take his revenge on those who took his life. And of course, he realizes that the being that brought him back has his own motives, and even the woman who becomes his partner has her own motives too, So it's like there's a lot of skullduggery going on and things of that nature that I wanted to deal with, but it's really the aesthetics and just the boldness of that time is what I wanted to deal with, I love the aesthetics of the '20s, and then thinking about how family members of mine have fought in World War II on, mm-hmm. Including myself. So that's an era that's that's World War I. So all these things were going on. It's just. And so the Scythe has that World War I type of clothing on, World War I mixed with voodoo type of looking like Byron Sumdy.
Yeah.
Oh man, I just loved it. I love writing in that era, and that's another one I wrote the sequel to, but another one I just went too far. Said no. It's called The Scythe, Long Pig. If you don't know what long pig is, that's eating human flesh.
Yeah.
And so he uncovers this cult that's eating human flesh. It was just too much. I said, nah.
Well, let me read it and let me decide. Hold all this stuff back. I want to find out if this is too much.
I'll pull it out and give it to you, but it's pretty gross. So.
Yeah, I've gotten you're one of the people that have gotten me used to reading horror. I'm not a big horror. For some odd reason, you and a bunch of my other author friends seem to be our friends, have me dabbling in it because of peer pressure. But but before that's the last thing I want to touch on is games. You and I had a discussion as not too long after we met, and we were talking about RPG games.
Right.
And I had no experience with RPG whatsoever. I still have very little experience. But the discussion we had about it was similar to the discussion that we had about speculative fiction and Black people. And you talked about it early on about the lack of representation when you were playing Dungeons and Dragons back in the day. And that discussion led to Kikanga and the creation of that game, and which we're working on another version now. Give us a little bit of your background, like I say, a brief description of Kikanga, because you created the mythology behind it that sets up the whole world and what it is and how it operates. So describe that a little bit.
Okay, so briefly, I started playing role-playing games in '79. Okay. I believe they came out in '74, Dungeons and Dragons, Arnax, Gygax and Arneson, Dave Arneson and Gary Gygax created Dungeons and Dragons, not just Gary Gygax, because a lot of people just give him credit. And then from there, I went into many other role-playing games. I decided I wanted to learn all the ones, all that was out there. Mm-hmm. I was young then. I could commit all this stuff to memory. I'm not memorizing a role-playing game now, but not even the ones I write. But on page 37, I'm like, I don't know, I got to get the book out. But back in the days, because a lot of they wouldn't, and we were told, this is just too much for you, it's too deep for you, this and that. And this one dude who was an orc decided to experiment and see if Black people actually could learn to play. Well, my sisters, when I told them that story, they were pissed. So they went out and got me advanced Dungeons and Dragons. You think, oh, you're doing basic. Now I got advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right? So started in the Move books. You see these red boxes, blue boxes. That's the basic Dungeons and Dragons, which a lot of people getting back into now because it's really simple gaming, right? And I got Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which was a mess the way it was written. Mm-hmm. So learn how to, but I put all the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, I committed those to memory over Christmas break and came back playing. I became a Dungeon Master, didn't know what the hell I was doing because, like I said, they were written so terribly. A lot of times you're just making up your own version. So every table of Dungeons and Dragons was different. You could come to me and play one way, come to Joe right over the next table and he playing a different way. So doing that, right? But I began to love role-playing games, moved on from D&D because we just weren't there. We weren't there in none of them really, but some things were easy to make ourselves in, like the superhero game, all that, because Marvel made superhero game and it was dope, and it still is really. Mm-hmm. So played in that, and then I decided, well, I want to make my own game since, been writing different adventures in Africa and things like that. And, we met, and after our conversation, said, okay, we're going to do it. First game I made, the prototype, you rejected it. Like, it didn't have a random generator. I was like, we're going to go totally different from these cats. And you're like, man, it's got to have some kind of random generator. Damn. It's just, and so I said, okay, then I don't want to go with dice, let's go with cards. And that's how we did. But, the whole premise, for those who don't know, is the way Kikanga, the continent, comes into, it's an analog for Africa. The way it comes into existence really is, it was there, but there were these two groups, the Ram and the Utuchekulu, the giants and the dwarves warring with each other. And they took that war to heaven. So the creator, Darwala, said, what the hell? I'm going to kill all these folks. You're going to bring it. And so he goes to heaven, and he's about to strike, to earth. He's about to strike the earth with his axe and destroy it. And his wife, Ada, Odu, whatever you want to call it, right? She stops him. And because she had love for humanity, and he doesn't, he hits it, but he stops going all the way through and causes this cleave, which is called the cleave in Kikanga, and his axe shatters into millions of little shards, and those shards, they become part of the earth, and it really, that's where magical beings grow from, those shards. So they all have some of Darulah's axe's power, and that's what creates all the different monsters and amazing beings, and it creates, and you came up with the name for the shards that still are shards, Kipande.
Kipande, yeah.
And Kipande, it still has that power of Darulah, so it can make changes in people, who possess it. You can put it in weapons, you can do different things with it, in magic items. So, we came up with some great world building, and then writing the novels for it and everything, just expanded the world. And what I want to do now is just really deep dive into everything that's written about Kikanga, your novels, mine, short stories, everything, and then begin to create a world manual too.
Yeah.
So people it can be kind of uniform what they're doing and shit, what we doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, like the name, I use some other name for sorcerer, and you use Sanchai. I say, okay, I like that better. So then I began to change things to Sanchai, everything I had written with something about a wizard.
Yeah, and that's been it's been a cool collaboration, because I'm looking at what you're doing, and some of the stories that I'm writing, I realized at some point that I wasn't even incorporating a small part of what's in the book, the guide for the book. And I'm starting to do more and more of that, and looking into that, and incorporating that into the stories, and it's just making the stories so much richer, and more familiar to the people who are playing the game, because they can see where the elements are being incorporated into the stories, and it'll probably help them with their storytelling and their adventures when they develop for Kikanga. So
I want to say too, thinking about how when you first came to the game, you hadn't played, so you were thinking of it more like a fiction book, right?
Yeah.
So so I said, well, Milton, it's not like it's written fiction like that. But then I said, well, there's a group of games that are called Powered by the Apocalypse, and in it they say fiction first, and you do certain things in the fiction that trigger the game mechanics. And I said, that's now what I want our game to be. So Powered by the Apocalypse, they allow you to create with their framework, right? and it's the fiction first. So now I figured out how to do our stories in the fiction first, and incorporating Kipande and all of that, using mechanics that we have and mechanics that Powered by the Apocalypse, called PBTA, that they have, to create something great. So I'll be sending you that. I got so many versions of Kikanga 2.0 that I'll be sending you that one. I think that one is the one, and you inspired that one in me to do those mechanics.
So as you guys can see, this is what happens when we get together. We start brainstorming, and because that happens, we're out of time.
Yeah.
So expect a Balogun Ojetade 2.0 interview, because I really want to talk to him in more detail about the games that he has developed after Kikanga, because that's where a lot of his creative energy is right now. And I want to get into the process and understand how he develops games compared to what other people are doing as far as games are concerned. So Balogun, thank you so much for being here. Before we
Thank you for having me.
Let people know where they can find you and find your work.
Well, you can find all of my work on Amazon.com. Type in Balogun, Balogun, Ojetade, Ojetade, I think is right there. And then I'm on Facebook, Instagram, at Balogun Ojetade. Facebook, just Facebook, .com/African with a K .marshall.arts. I'm there. And Chronicles of Harriet.com, that has, and I need to start writing for it again. It has all kind of everything about Afrofuturism, every Kikanga book that comes out, any of Milton books that come out, I put in there, and other authors that are doing so-called Afrofuturism, Black speculative fiction, right? And my own stuff, games and stuff like that. So you can go to, most people aren't going to websites too much anymore, but it's a pretty cool website. And you can also catch me every Saturday at 1 p.m. on YouTube or Facebook Live for Warrior Class. I do that with Belay Jones and Ominiki Wade. We do a great class about self-defense and reading for warriors. It's good warrior stuff, African warrior stuff, right? So you can catch us on Warrior Class, 1 p.m. Every Saturday.
Cool. So I hope you guys enjoyed 11 Questions Special Edition. We'll have more episodes coming up soon. And if you want to continue to support us, check us out on our YouTube channel, which you're probably watching right now. And you can also support our Patreon. All your contributions have to go for us to be able to continue to produce these videos, and also to support some of the other projects that we're working on. So it's Milton Davis with 11 Questions Special Edition, and we'll see you guys soon. Peace.
Peace.